They say that by the time we reach 50, we've lived long enough that nothing can surprise us anymore. I used to think that too. At 53, with a thriving therapy practice, a 25-year marriage, and a son fresh out of college, I believed I had built a solid, predictable life. As a therapist, I had spent 2 decades listening to other people's secrets, helping them piece back together lives shattered by lies. The irony was cruel. I could see destructive patterns in others' stories, yet I was blind to what was unfolding in my own home. My name is Cheryl, and this is the story of the day my castle of lies collapsed. The morning of our anniversary began like any other. Edward, my husband, had already left for work. After 25 years, he was still the same workaholic. He had built one of the largest construction companies in the region, and that success always excused his absences, the endless trips, the mysterious calls behind his locked office door. Thomas, our 24-year-old son, had moved back in a few months after graduating law school. He was preparing for the bar exam while working as his father's assistant. The two of them had always been close, or at least that's what I thought. "Mom, don't forget the catering appointment today," Thomas reminded me over breakfast, eyes fixed on a stack of papers. The anniversary party was my surprise for Edward. 25 years deserved to be celebrated. Even though our marriage hadn't felt like a fairy tale for a long time, I wanted to believe that his distance came from fatigue, from middle age. That afternoon I tied up the final details for the party, set to happen 3 days later, an intimate gathering about 50 guests. The reception hall downstairs in our building was booked, catering confirmed, the keepsakes ordered. Edward thought it was just going to be a private dinner. For me, the party was a way of saying that despite everything, I still believed in this marriage. While talking with the decorator, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Edward. It's urgent." I ignored it. Probably a mistake. Then another. "Please, Cheryl, it's Lucia. This is about your family and mine." The name meant nothing to me. I blocked the number and went back to work. It wasn't the first time some woman had tried to stir trouble about Edward. He was attractive, successful, the kind of man who drew attention, envy, even obsession. At least that's what I told myself. In the days before the party, Thomas grew uneasy. Dark circles under his eyes, whispered calls, avoiding my gaze. "Are you okay, son?" I asked at dinner. He forced a smile. "Yeah, Mom. Just tired. You know how demanding Dad can be." I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to. The night of the party came. The room was dazzling in gold and burgundy, with photos lining the tables. Our wedding, my pregnancy, family trips, graduations. Edward got home at 7 p.m., and I told him to change for a special dinner. In the elevator, I held his hand. It was cold, trembling. "You okay?" I asked, adjusting the tie I had bought him. "Just a hard day at work," he muttered. When the doors opened and everyone shouted, "Surprise!" What I saw in his eyes wasn't wonder but panic. The party carried on, lively and full of laughter. Edward quickly slipped back into his perfect host persona, but I knew better. He scanned the room constantly, drinking more than usual. When the MC announced it was time for speeches, I noticed him whisper into Thomas's ear. My son's face went pale, his eyes wet, shaking his head in refusal. Edward pressed harder, then stood, clinking his glass. "Friends, family, thank you for being here tonight. 25 years beside an extraordinary woman deserves celebration." Applause erupted. My heart swelled despite the distance we'd carried for years. And then he continued, "And it's precisely out of respect for Cheryl that I can't keep living in lies. I have a confession. In that instant, Thomas broke down sobbing, then bolted from the room. I moved to follow, but Edward gripped my wrist tightly. "Let him go, Cheryl. He already knows." He looked me straight in the eyes. "I have another family. In New York. I've been with Lucia for 18 years. We have 2 children, Valerie, 17, and Matthew, 15. The room spun. Gasps, the crash of glass, dozens of stares. And he went on. "Lucia has terminal cancer. She only has a few months left. I promised I wouldn't keep our kids hidden any longer." At that moment, I understood. My husband was mourning another woman on the night of our anniversary, and my son had carried the burden of this truth alone for months. But I refused to give Edward the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. 23 years as a therapist had taught me composure in the face of terrible secrets. I looked around at the stunned, pitying faces and spoke clearly. "Thank you for your honesty, Edward. I think the party is over." I held my head high and walked out, ignoring the whispers behind me. Only when the elevator doors closed did the tears flood down. At home, I found Thomas's door locked. I knocked softly. "Son, it's me. Open up." Silence, then the click of the lock. Inside, he looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. He collapsed onto the bed, shaking. 3 months. I found monthly transfers to New York, saw pictures of him with them on a phone he left unlocked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I choked. "How could I, Mom?" His eyes brimmed red. "I couldn't be the one to shatter you like this. I thought if I confronted him first, he'd stop. He'd choose us." "But—" I sat beside him, holding his trembling hands in mine. "It was never your job to protect me, Thomas. Never." "I tried, Mom. I swear I tried. 2 weeks ago, I confronted him. I threatened to tell you if he didn't end it. He promised he would fix it. I didn't know that fixing it meant humiliating you in public like this." I wrapped my arms around him, his sobs shaking against my shoulder. In that moment, it wasn't me who needed comfort, it was my son, crushed by the weight of a secret too heavy to bear alone. The sound of the front door opening broke the silence. Edward was home. Thomas and I locked eyes, a silent language only a mother and child understand. "Go to the guest room, lock the door," he said firmly, his voice suddenly older, protective. "Don't face him tonight. Not like this." I nodded, grateful to let him shield me. I needed time to think, to steady myself. As a therapist, I always told patients not to make big decisions in the heat of emotion. Now it was my turn to follow that advice. In the quiet of the guest room, lying on the unfamiliar bed, I replayed 18 years of memories, missed signs I should have seen, trips that lasted longer than planned, hushed calls in the office, phone passwords changing, the cold distance I excused as stress, age, routine. The painful truth was simple. I hadn't wanted to see. Believing in the life I thought I had was easier than facing the possibility it was all a lie. That night, I overheard muffled arguments between Edward and Thomas in the living room. Raised voices, then silence. The slam of the front door, footsteps in the hall, a pause outside my room, then the click of the master bedroom door. Edward had stayed. I didn't know if that was better or worse. Part of me wanted him gone for good, back to that other family. Another part wanted to scream, to smash everything, to demand answers for every stolen moment, every deception. The next morning came mercilessly. The light revealed the truth. My 25-year marriage had mostly been a facade. I was forced to decide what to do with the shattered pieces left behind. But the apartment, it was empty. On the kitchen table lay a white envelope with Edward's familiar handwriting. Inside was a 5-page letter, confessions, apologies, excuses, and a note saying he would spend 2 weeks in New York to sort things out, then return to discuss our future. The last line froze my blood. There are more things we need to talk about when I come back. About Thomas, about us, about the past you tried to bury too. I was stunned. What was he implying? What secrets of mine? And why did they involve Thomas? I shoved the letter into a drawer, then did the only thing I knew: keep going. I canceled all my patient appointments for 2 weeks, contacted a few top lawyers. Then I called Thomas. "Son, we need to talk. Not about last night, not about your father, about the letter he left. About the past, the one he says I buried." On the other end, silence so long I thought the line had dropped. Finally, Thomas's hoarse voice. "Mom, I'll come over. There are things you need to know. Things I found out while digging into Dad. They involve you and me." A chill shot down my spine. I knew Edward's confession was only the beginning. There were more layers of secrets waiting to be uncovered. While waiting for my son, I opened a bottle of wine. Even though it was only 10 a.m., social rules meant nothing anymore. I sat on the balcony, watching the crowd below rushing through their ordinary lives, oblivious to the collapse of mine. Memories dragged me back 28 years, to when I met Edward. I was 25, fresh out of school, full of dreams. I had just ended a painful college romance with Michael Vega, a breakup that nearly destroyed me. Edward appeared at a friend's party, charming, successful, 8 years older. 6 months later, we were engaged. A year after that, married. 9 months later, I found out I was pregnant with Thomas. I never told Edward that a few weeks before meeting him, I had tried to see Michael one last time, hoping to reconcile. Michael refused to meet, sending his younger sister instead. Her name was Lucia Vega. That name now hit me like a punch. Lucia, the same name as Edward's mistress in New York. Coincidence? Or something more? The doorbell cut through my thoughts. Thomas stood there, gaunt, eyes bloodshot. I hugged him tightly. He trembled, then whispered, "Mom, sit down. What I'm about to say isn't easy." We poured more wine. Thomas stared into his glass, then began. "Remember when I started working at Dad's company? On the second day, he told me to organize old files. I found a locked folder, the key hidden behind the picture you gave me when I graduated. Inside were documents about regular money transfers and something else, a DNA test." My heart clenched. I asked, "Between your father and those other kids?" Thomas lifted his eyes, pain etched deep. "No, Mom. Between me and Edward." The room froze. Thomas went on, voice flat as if rehearsed for years. "The results showed no biological relation. Edward is not my real father." The wine glass shook in my hands, nearly slipping. Memories flooded back. My broken romance with Michael, the rushed wedding, the pregnancy right after. "When did you find out?" I asked, my voice trembling. 10 years ago. When Edward took me for tests, said it was for a premium family insurance plan. He told me to just sign routine paperwork. I didn't understand until I found the results in that folder. I stayed quiet because I was scared. I sat frozen. Thomas looked straight at me, his words deliberate. "Mom, is Michael Vega my biological father?" I couldn't breathe. Looking at my 24-year-old son, I had always thought he carried Edward's family features. But now, with doubt planted, I saw traits that belonged to neither Edward nor me. Yes, I finally admitted, a tear sliding down my cheek. It's possible, but I never doubted you were Edward's son. The timing matched. Only that before I met your father, I had one last encounter with Michael. I didn't think it was possible. Thomas nodded slowly, as if puzzle pieces were finally clicking together. So that explains everything. That's why after the DNA test years ago, Dad started treating me differently. That's why he went after Lucia in New York. Mom, it was revenge. A cold, calculated revenge carried out over a decade. I froze. What do you mean? Lucia is Michael's sister. Dad deliberately sought her out after discovering about you and Michael, and about me. He built another family with the sister of the man who could be my real father. A real family, with kids who are truly his. My chest tightened. This was beyond betrayal of love or body. It was a cruelly crafted vendetta. Edward had turned innocent people into pawns, constructed an entire life just to punish me for a mistake I didn't even know I'd made. Thomas wiped his tears, but fury burned in his eyes. Last night, after you went to the guest room, Dad told me everything. He said he had planned this confession for months. The only reason he revealed it now is because Lucia is really dying of cancer. He wants their children legally recognized. And he thought you deserved to know the truth about me. A rage I had never known erupted inside me, not just for Edward's infidelity, but for his cold, deliberate cruelty. What else did he say? I asked, my voice calmer than the storm within. Thomas replied. He said Michael went back to Argentina 24 years ago, living quietly in Mendoza, running a vineyard. He never knew about me. Lucia didn't know the connection between you two until recently. Dad said when he comes back, he'll not only recognize his kids with Lucia, but give you the chance to meet my real father. Each word was another blade. The thought that Edward had orchestrated this, waiting for the cruelest moment our plays. 25th anniversary to humiliate me publicly left me breathless. Mom, what do we do? Thomas whispered, suddenly looking so young, so vulnerable. I took a deep breath. Years as a therapist had trained me to think clearly even in agony. First, we confirm everything. We can't just take Edward's word as truth. We'll redo the DNA test, and if necessary, we'll find Michael Vega. Thomas's eyes lit up, the first spark of hope I had seen since the nightmare began. Do you know where to find him? No, I admitted, but I know who does. Lucia, Thomas said instantly. Exactly, the woman who had messaged me before the party, the woman now battling terminal cancer. And the sister of Michael, the man who might be my son's real father. In the days that followed, my life turned upside down. I hired a private investigator recommended by a former patient, discreet, reliable, with no ties to Edward. I worked with my lawyers to prepare divorce papers and division of assets, bracing for a long legal war. And most importantly, I replied to Lucia's message, "We need to talk, just between us women, without Edward." The reply came almost immediately. "Thank you. That's all I wanted. Can I call you right now?" I sat in my chair, heart pounding. When the phone rang, I picked up. The voice on the other end surprised me, not arrogant, not triumphant, but tired, frail, with a faint Argentine accent. "Cheryl, this is Lucia Vega. Thank you for hearing me." I went straight to the point. "Why did you try to contact me before the party?" Lucia was silent for a moment, then said, "Because I only discovered the truth 2 weeks ago, about you, about your son, about my brother, and about why Edward sought me out. What reason? A single word fell like a stone. Revenge. Lucia explained she found everything after unlocking Edward's private office with a spare key he didn't. You know she had. Inside was a full folder. DNA results, old photos of me with Michael, proof of what Edward had known for over 10 years. And when she received a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, with only months left to live, she wanted her children to be acknowledged. I never thought he'd use this to humiliate you publicly. Believe me, Cheryl. I tried to stop him. I choked up. I wanted to hate Lucia, but I couldn't. We were just two women manipulated by the same man. I asked about Michael. Her answer shook me. He's still in Napa Valley, never married, and he never forgot you. I froze. Why had he refused to see me then? Lucia was quiet for a long time, then confessed. It wasn't him who refused, it was me. I was 20, foolish, and infatuated with Edward. I lied, told you my brother had someone else, that he didn't want to see you. I did it because Edward said he needed time to break up with me before being with you. I believed him, and I ruined everything. My heart shattered. My whole life had veered off course because of one lie from a naive girl Edward had manipulated. Lucia ended. Michael never knew about Thomas. He deserves to know the truth, and so does Thomas. I looked at my son, saw fear and hope mingling in his eyes. Mom, we're going to see him, aren't we? I nodded. Yes, but first, you and I will redo the DNA test. Then I'll tell you who your real father is. The days that followed were a storm. The test confirmed Thomas was indeed my biological son. My lawyer began preparing divorce papers, uncovering at the same time that Edward had embezzled millions of dollars from the company over 15 years to support his second family in New York. These proofs were enough to ruin his career and reputation. Ironically, the cruel revenge Edward had so carefully planned became his own sentence. After the confession, Thomas and I set out for Napa Valley. The trip was steeped in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, anxious for the meeting that could change our lives forever. Michael's winery sat on the slope of a mountain, overlooking endless valleys covered in vineyards. It was October fall in California, the vines glowing with red and gold leaves, promising a rich harvest. We hadn't told him we were coming. A part of me feared that, if Michael knew, he might refuse to see us. An employee led us to the main house, a rustic yet elegant structure of wood and stone. And there, on the porch facing the vineyards, he stood. Michael Vega was 60 now. His hair completely silver, wrinkles etched into his sun-darkened face, but his eyes, those deep, dark eyes that had captivated me in youth, were unchanged. When he looked up and saw me, after 28 years, recognition was instant. Michael stood abruptly, the book in his hand falling. My God, is it really you? Hello, Michael, I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced, but we need to talk. His eyes shifted to the young man beside me, confusion flashing across his face. Then suddenly, a realization dawned, shaking his world. This is Thomas, I introduced, my heart racing. My son. Michael invited us in, his hands trembling as he poured wine for the three of us. In the warmth of the living room, I told the whole story. The breakup with Michael, Lucia's lie, the rushed marriage to Edward, Thomas's birth, Edward's cruel plan for revenge, and his devastating confession at our anniversary party. Michael listened in silence, his face shifting through shock, anger, pain, and finally, a glimmer of hope. When I finished, he sighed. I always felt something was wrong. When I came back and found you gone, then heard you'd married Edward so quickly, I couldn't believe it. I had bought a ring. Cheryl. That week I was going to propose. His words struck like lightning. A ring, a proposal, an entire future that could have been mine destroyed by lies. "Why didn't you look for me?" I asked, voice breaking. "I did. For months. But you'd changed your number, your address. Friends told me you were happy, in love, moving on. Then I heard about the quick wedding. I thought maybe I had never meant to you what you meant to me." Thomas followed every word, every gesture. His eyes, now I saw, were identical to Michael's. "And you're a winemaker," Thomas suddenly said, breaking the silence. "Something I always dreamed of being." Michael looked surprised. "You're interested in wine?" "Since I can remember. I have a small collection, took a few tasting courses. But Edward, my dad always said it was pointless, made me study law." Michael smiled for the first time, a smile that revealed the dimples I remembered. "Would you like to see the winery? We're in the middle of fall pruning. It's the best time to understand the process." The afternoon passed like a dream. Michael showed Thomas around, explaining, sharing his knowledge. From afar I watched, my heart full of bittersweetness, joy that my son had found a connection, sorrow for the years stolen from us. As night fell, we ate dinner on the porch under the infinite starry sky. Michael asked the question we had all avoided. "So, what happens now?" Thomas looked at me, then at Michael, uncertainty clear in his face. I answered, "What's certain is that I'll divorce Edward. My lawyer has already prepared the papers, and with proof of his embezzlement, I'll secure my fair share." Thomas whispered, "And what about me? On paper, Edward is still my father. He raised me, but—" Michael spoke gently. "Thomas, I'm not here to take anyone's place, but if you want to know me, to explore this part of yourself, I'm here. I'll always be here." That night, in Napa Valley, a new chapter began for all. 3 of us, not erasing the past, but reshaping the future. We stayed 2 more days, just enough for Michael to call it building bridges for the future, ways to stay connected, to create a bond, late but still meaningful. Before we left, Miguel found me on the porch at dawn. "It's hard to believe, Cheryl. You've raised him so wonderfully." "Thank you. He's the best thing in my life," I whispered, my throat tight. I've always wondered, if that day Lucia hadn't lied, if we had stayed together, how different everything might have been. I've wondered, too, especially during the hard times in my marriage, I replied. But the past is what it is. What matters now is the future. Miguel looked at me, his gaze as intense as ever. "And what about the future?" I drew a deep breath and spoke honestly. "It's still wide open. First, I need to settle my life, finalize the divorce, get my finances in order, help Thomas through this. After that," I left the thought hanging, but Miguel understood. "I've waited 28 years. I can wait longer." When Thomas and I flew back to New York, something inside us had shifted. The pain Edward caused was still there, but now there was hope, a new path unfolding. Thomas decided to keep Edward's last name because it was the identity he'd carried his whole life, but he would also spend more time learning winemaking with Miguel. "Maybe someday I'll start a U.S. Argentina wine import business," he said, eyes shining for the first time in months. As for me, I decided it was time to practice what I had always told my patients: healing. Pain leaves scars, but scars are proof that wounds have healed. Edward returned 2 weeks later. But instead of a broken wife, he found an empty apartment, frozen accounts, and a thick file of evidence of his embezzlement. I didn't need to be there to see his face. When he called, shouting and threatening. I only said, "It's not because you had another family, Edward. It's because you built our entire life on lies. Now you must pay the price." The divorce was finalized quickly. Edward was forced to surrender a substantial share of assets, sell the company, and move permanently to Argentina. Lucia, against medical predictions, recovered somewhat with an experimental therapy. The doctors said she might have years left. Thomas divided his time between studying law and training in winemaking. For the first time in so long, I saw my son truly alive. And I, under the night sky of New York, knew this. Betrayed and wounded as I was, I had found myself again, and the future was still wide open. Thomas spent more time in New York than back and forth to California, where he began to know his half-siblings' relationships he never thought he would have. And Miguel and I, we started over slowly. Long nightly calls, sudden visits when his work brought him to my city, or when I had a reason to go to Napa to see Thomas. A friendship that grew into more, naturally, without rush, without heavy expectations. After all, we both carried complicated lives, decades lived apart. There was so much to rediscover, to relearn. 6 months after Edward's confession, I received an unexpected invitation. Lucia wanted to meet face to face. I admit, I hesitated. Even though our phone calls had been cordial, the truth that she had shared my husband for nearly 2 decades made it awkward. But there was also something liberating in facing it directly to close that chapter. We met at a small cafe in Los Angeles. 2 middle-aged women bound by an improbable story. She was thinner from treatment, but her eyes still glowed with the strength of someone determined to treasure each day. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this is strange. Life rarely follows the script we write." I smiled, realizing the conversation flowed easier than I had imagined. I think both of us learned that the hard way. Lucia smiled faintly, a sad but genuine smile. "Edward is changing. He's started therapy." I laughed softly. How ironic. After all those years of me preaching about therapy, he finally had to turn to it. Lucia studied me. He said something interesting. That all those years of planning revenge ended up with the exact opposite of what he wanted. He wanted to cut you off from your past, but instead you and my brother Miguel found each other again. He wanted Thomas never to know his real father, but now you two are inseparable. He wanted to keep 2 families apart, but in the end, we're all bound together. I sat silent. She was right, life has a strange way of balancing itself. Lucia went on. "And you and Miguel? What about you two?" I felt my face flush, something I hadn't felt in decades. "We're finding each other again. Complicated and simple at the same time, like getting to continue something that should never have ended." Lucia nodded. "He deserves happiness, and so do you, Cheryl. A mistake at 20 shouldn't define an entire life." I looked at the woman I was supposed to see as an enemy, yet instead, I felt an unexpected bond. We were both women Edward had manipulated, but in the end, we reclaimed our autonomy, our own stories. "And you, Lucia? What do you want for the future?" She gazed out the cafe window at the bustling city. "Time. I want time to see my children grow, to repair my mistakes, to live the life I choose, not the one chosen for me." That night, back at my hotel, I received a message from Miguel. "How was the meeting?" "Like an old wound finally starting to heal," I replied. He wrote back, "You are an extraordinary woman, Cheryl. Always have been, always will be." Lying in bed, I thought of the past months, Edward's confession, Thomas's tears, the buried past, the betrayal, and the freedom that truth had brought. At 53, I was beginning again, not from nothing, but carrying all the wisdom, scars, and love for my son. A year later, on a radiant spring morning in Napa, Miguel led me up a hill overlooking the endless vineyards. 29 years ago, I had a ring and a question, he said, his voice trembling as he held my hands. We took the long way around, but now I want to ask again. Cheryl, will you write a new story with me? Tears fell not of regret, but of gratitude. He pulled out a new ring, not for what was lost, but for what was to come. And I said yes. That same day, Thomas shared his own news. He and his girlfriend, a wine student, were expecting their first baby. Life, in its mysterious way, was giving us not only second chances but new generations. Lucia lived 3 more years, long enough to see her grandchild, long enough to make peace with her past, to smile at the present. Edward remained by her side until the end. A man changed, at least in part, by facing loss. When Thomas and his wife Clara placed the baby in my arms, I saw dark eyes and familiar curls, linking 3 generations together. "What's his name?" I asked. Thomas and Clara exchanged a look. Then he said, "Miguel Edward Collins, to honor all the paths that brought us here." I looked at Miguel, my husband now, shedding tears as he watched his grandson. I thought of Edward, who, despite his sins, had raised Thomas. I thought of Lucia, who made grave mistakes in youth, but ultimately left behind reconciliation. I realized we are all storytellers, rewriting our lives when new truths emerge, when new perspectives open. The day Edward stood at our anniversary party and said, "I have a confession. I thought it was the end, but it was only the beginning of a journey from lies to truth, from collapse to renewal, from illusion to authenticity. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this: it is never too late to live in truth. It is never too late to start over, and it is never too late to become who you were always meant to be." Edward's confession ended a castle of lies, but it also opened the first chapter of the truest love story of my life. Sometimes truth arrives later than we wish, but it opens doors we never dared to imagine. Cheryl's story shows us, no matter the wounds, no matter how many years were stolen by deceit, love, forgiveness, and the courage to face the truth, can bring a new beginning. What strikes me most is this: in family, there are things we cannot choose, but we can always choose how we face them and move forward. And that choice defines who we are. And you? If you were in Cheryl's place, would you have the courage to let go of the past and write your own story again? Share your thoughts below. I believe every perspective can offer us a valuable lesson. Don't forget to follow along for the next stories where we listen together, learn together, and find strength to heal and begin again.